Good day, ladies and gentlemen. So I don't know if you all are seeing the glitches and the lockups and things since the latest update for Mac OS and iOS and all the other OSs have come out. My household has had all kinds of issues, and some of them have to do with what you all are seeing. So I apologize for that. I don't think there's anything I can do. I wasn't sure we're going to get to go today, but I restarted everything and it seems to be working well enough. So we're going to give it a shot. Good morning, everybody. Great to see you. Also, another technical glitch. It appears as though this didn't post to Facebook, and I don't know why that is. So if you normally watch us on Facebook and you had to hunt this down on YouTube or X, well, I don't know what to do about that either. I'll try to look into it. Anyway, let's see. Chemo says going to go ahead and cancel my Costco membership since I am no longer preparing for the Great Tribulation. Maybe that should be the opposite. Maybe you should stock up because there's so many great times ahead and we're not preparing for such awful things. Frank says, Doug, is your son singing that song? He is indeed. Yeah, if you look on anywhere you listen to music, Apple Music or Spotify or whatever, look up Gabe Gooden, and his album is called Looking Back at Tomorrow. And that song and many other great songs are on there, so appreciate you saying that. It's good to see. John says hello and good day to all. Thanks again to Gabe for his inspirational and uplifting music. Well, cool. I'll share those sentiments with him. Thank you. All right, so we're in Matthew 24, and we have been listening to Jesus answer the questions. And I know some of you are tired of hearing this review, but I have, for most of you, decades of missing or dismissing the context to try to undo. And for anyone who comes across this later, you need to be aware of it, even as we look further into the chapter. Jesus just said, the house of the scribes and Pharisees is going to be left desolate. And desolate is an intentional term. And by referring to it as their house, he's talking about the temple. The temple is going to be left desolate, which if you just look through the prophets, Isaiah and Daniel in particular, and see how the word desolate is used, it is regularly what is left after God brings a nation to destroy a city or a land. The temple and Jerusalem being left desolate is almost a technical term for another nation coming and destroying the city and the temple. That's what Jesus is getting at. Then the disciples point out the magnificent structure of the temple to Jesus, and Jesus says, I tell you, not one stone will be left upon another. This house, this temple, is going to be destroyed and desolate. Well, the disciples know their the prophecies of the Old Testament like Daniel, and they say, when, Lord? What will be the sign that you are coming, your presence, your parousia, your arrival to destroy the temple? What will be the sign that is about to take place and the end, the goal, the soon telos of the age? The disciples are not asking, Lord, you're going to leave. When are you coming back to earth? They are not asking, what's the sign of the end of all things or the end of time? That is not even hinted at in the context. They're asking him to answer the question, when and how will we know that there is a nation coming to destroy the temple? And Jesus walks through and says, you're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars. People are going to come in my name claiming to be me. Don't listen to them. They're going to persecute you. The gospel of the kingdom will be preached throughout the Roman Empire, and then the telos, then the goal will be reached. And it's going to happen in your lifetimes, he says to his disciples. Well, Strictly speaking, he says within a generation. I suppose it's not accurate to say within their lifetimes because most of them will be dead, or at least many of those who are listening here. But we have to keep it in its first century context. Yeah. Okay. So he goes on then and says, "Woe to those with child and to those giving suck in those days." When this desolation comes, and yesterday we looked at the abomination of desolation, which Daniel spoke of. When the time has come, when the army shows up at the door to destroy the city and the temple, then those who are in Judea are to flee to the mountains. All right, I don't know, is Darren with us this morning? But whether he is with us or just some of you know Darren's approach to things, which is also my approach to this. Do you happen to know what city or town you could get to by fleeing to the mountains from Jerusalem? Anybody? Anybody? If you haven't heard Darren mention the flight to Pella, he used to have that as his label, his name, his handle on YouTube there. We talked about this in the Revelation series. I think there is a strong case to be made that this statement, when you see the abomination of desolation, or as Luke puts it, when you see the armies surrounding Jerusalem flee to the mountains, there is at least one historian who asserts that at this time, getting close to AD 70, that a significant number of Christians fled into the mountains to Pella, modern day Jordan area, and were saved from the slaughter by the Roman armies. Yep, very good, Damie. Can I get Pella for 100, Bob? Yeah, so that makes more sense than anything else to me of this, that there are a group of Christians who took Jesus at his word. When they saw the Romans show up, they fled and settled. Many of them stayed in a town called Pella for a while. That's what Jesus says. When you see this, run, head to the mountains. If you're on the housetop, do not go back to get anything. If you're in the field, don't go back in to get your garments. And then he says, woe to those with child and those giving suck in those days. Some of you, such as Amy, are better equipped to empathize with that statement than I am, though I have a wife who had 3 children, and I certainly understand how difficult it would be to flee for your life through that kind of terrain with small children. Right? When these Roman armies show up, you're not going to have time to pack. And if you have small children, it is hard to run with small children. It's hard to be silent if you need to hide. I mean, it's a bad situation. That's what Jesus says. Woe to those with child and those giving suck in those days. And pray that your flight may not be in winter nor on a Sabbath. Again, travel is hard in the winter. In a Jewish city and terrain like Judea, there are certain things you're not allowed to do on the Sabbath. So that's going to create situations. It's just, this is going to be bad. You're going to have to run, and just pray that it's not in the winter, it's not on the Sabbath. And if you have small children, this is going to be a tough time. And then he says this. Chad, I think it's Eusebius. Somebody fact check me on that. Is it Eusebius? I think that's who it is. For there will then be great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of the world until now, no, nor may be. And if those days were not shortened, no flesh would have been saved. But because of the chosen, will those days be shortened. All right, so people read this. In fact, I think somebody mentioned it yesterday in one of the comments after the fact. Might have been Rico. He's our resident dispensationalist that for some reason likes to tag along and spend all of his time trying to convince you all that I'm crazy. And he doesn't have any good arguments. He just has assertions. But for whatever reason, he decides that that's worth his time to do that. And I love the fact that so many of you see right through his bad arguments and just don't give him too much of your time. He's not worth it. But I think he was comparing the Great Tribulation here to the Holocaust. If it wasn't him, it was somebody. And certainly I've received this response many times. So Jesus says, there will be then great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of the world until now, nor may be. And the argument goes, we know the Holocaust was so horrific, talking about the 20th century Holocaust, Hitler and so on, and what he and the Nazis did to the Jews is just unconscionable, right? I don't know, maybe some of you have been to Auschwitz and seen even what is still there, and we all know, at least we should know, the descriptions of what was done to the Jews there. And so when Jesus says there will be such great tribulation, such as was not from the beginning of the world and no nor may be, the assumption is, obviously, he is talking about the Holocaust. This can't be something that happened in the first century, because that's not as bad as the Holocaust. Well, there's two things you need to think through about that. Number one, that is a statement of tremendous ignorance. And I mean ignorant in the literal sense. The only person who would say that is someone who is not aware of what it was like in Jerusalem in 70 AD. If you read the account of Josephus and tried to decide which was worse, 70 AD or the Holocaust, I'm not sure that you could answer that question. But if you think the Holocaust was far worse than 70 AD, you are ignorant of 70 AD and what happened there. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, to compare what happened in Jerusalem in the siege to the Holocaust is to assume that the Jews of the 20th century were related to the Jews of the first century in terms of prophecy. And they aren't. After 70 AD, the Jewish people are no longer to be thought of as God's chosen people. They are not a chosen nation. Circumcision means nothing. Nothing. The one who's a Jew is not one who is a Jew outwardly, but inwardly. So to look at the nation of Israel that formed in 1948 and any of those on either side of 1948 and to equate something that happened to them with this is to misunderstand the role of the Jews in history. After the first century, they are just another nation or another people group. They have no significance in prophecy. Do you see the point? So what happened to the Jews of modern day in Germany in that period of the 20th century, again, is unconscionable. That should never happen to any group of people. And we should look at it with all the abhorrence we can muster. but it has nothing to do with God's plans for the Jews in the scripture, because that was all completed in 70 AD. And Rico and others who are going to argue otherwise make their case and force them to stick to the text. They have nothing but pure assumption. It's the only argument. It's just to assume it's true and then argue from that assumption. So when Jesus says, this was so great that it's never happened like this before and never will be again, that's exactly what happened in 70 AD, and that would be it. Yep, Amy, you're ahead of me. That's where we're going here in just a second. You would flee to Colorado Springs instead of Pella. That's good. 1988, Joshua says, made one live. Congratulations. This Matt study has been fire. Well, that's good to hear. Thank you. I appreciate those kind words, Joshua, very much. Prophecies of the End Time says garbage. Yep, I wouldn't expect you. Oh, now you're throwing labels at me, though you can't spell. Yeah, that's the best you got. I know, is to call names. That's what people do when they don't have arguments. It's called an ad hominem, and it's illegitimate. All right, so yeah, Jesus here is simply referring to what Daniel was told many centuries prior. And it is just too bad that Darren is not with us today, because here I am using the Brenton translation again. He'd be so happy. So we've looked at this time and again, but let me just remind you. Daniel writes in what we see as Daniel 12, and at that time, Michael the great prince shall stand up, that stands over the children of thy people. Right, so this is Michael, the one who is the angel for Israel. That's what he means by the children of your people. Who was Daniel's people? The Israelites. Right? He's your prince, the spiritual being who guards them. There shall be a time of tribulation. Such tribulation as has not been from the time that there was a nation on the earth until that time. Right? So when Jesus says, such has not been from the beginning of the world until that time, he's speaking truth, but also connecting what's going to happen within a generation to what Daniel said. In other words, he is affirming, just like he said, the abomination that was spoken of by Daniel, he's referring to Daniel again here, Daniel 12, and indicating that what is going to happen within a generation is what Daniel 12 was talking about. That's why he uses this similar terminology. That's why we have to continue to read the prophets as we look at these things, because it's all there. We saw this again and again in the Revelation series. All right, does that make sense? You see what I'm getting at? So the point is not only to elevate how awful this tribulation and distress is going to be, but he's also connecting it with the same language that was used by Daniel. Does everybody get that? He says, and if those days were not shortened, no flesh would have been saved. But because of the chosen, will those be shortened? There's a similar statement made in Revelation that we looked at. It is tempting for me to start comparing some of those numbers in Daniel and in Revelation. If you remember when we looked at those, sometimes their numbers are 1,290 days. Sometimes they are 1,335 days. Sometimes they're 1,260 days. One wonders if this idea has something to do with some numbers being shorter than others. And I'm just throwing this out here, trying to figure out, is there any other connection? Is there any prophecy connection to the days being shortened? Either way, Jesus is affirming that this could have been worse. But if it had been worse, then even the chosen Israelites would have been killed. Also reminds me of in Revelation, is it chapter 10, I forget, or 11, where John sees something and he's not allowed to write it down? Remember that? Makes me wonder if what he saw was what would have been, and then God backed off. I don't know. I'm speculating here, just trying to figure it out. Either way, Jesus is using more language here to express just how devastating this is going to be. Then if anyone may say to you, behold, here is the Christ, or here, you may not believe. For there will arise false Christs, false prophets. They will give great signs and wonders, so as to lead astray, if possible, also the chosen. Behold, I told you beforehand. If therefore they may say to you, behold, he is in the wilderness, you may not go forth. Behold, in the inner chambers, you may not believe. For as lightning comes from the east and appears to the west, so also will be the coming, the parousia, the arrival, not showing up in physical form, but his presence, his arrival to visit judgment. We looked at that last week when we looked at the opening verses of the chapter. As lightning comes forth from the east and appears in the west, so will be the arrival of the Son of Man, or the presence of the Son of Man. For wherever the carcass may be, there the eagles will be gathered together. I just had a thought. In fact, you may have detected I was a little distracted reading those upcoming verses because the thought popped in and I'm wrestling with it as I'm talking. So flesh this out with me a minute. The days being shortened, if those days were not shortened, no flesh would have been saved. Remember, I was talking yesterday about giving credence to Online Shelby's view that the one who endures to the end, to the telos, he will be saved. And we were discussing how saved here may not be eternal life, as I was thinking prior to going through this, but saved from the slaughter by the Romans. So just stay with me here and see. And again, just throwing this out as a possibility, but it just popped in my head as I was talking. Never thought of this before. He's warning them to run, right? When you see the armies, run for your lives from Judea. If you endure, if you remain, the word can be remain, doesn't have to include it's persevering through constant suffering. So if it just means you who remain to the goal, to that siege of Jerusalem, you'll be saved if you flee. Right? Is everybody tracking with that so far? That makes perfect sense in the context, it seems to me. If you remain till that end, if you're not killed, you can spare your life if you flee when you see the army show up. Don't go back in to get your garments and so on. If those days were not shortened, no one would have been saved. No one would have lived through it. What if the shortening is something along the lines of after they destroyed Jerusalem and the temple, they didn't go chasing those who left to slaughter them as well. But instead, the Lord moved in the hearts of Titus and his generals to be satisfied and not chase everybody down into the mountains, into Jordan or Pella, and that kind of thing. Huh. That actually fits the flow pretty well. Seems to me. I don't know. What do you think? I'm not trying to be persuasive here because it just literally popped into my head as I was reading. But is the argument making sense? The reason I say I'm not trying to persuade you is I'm not sure I've persuaded myself, but it's just interesting to think about here as we look at this. Any thoughts? Daniel says, yes, Eusebius. Good clarification. Thank you. Randy says, crystal clear. Excellent. Chemo says, so the greatest tribulation on God's chosen people, so it will never happen again. Correct. Well, yeah, I think that's fair. Eric says more people died in 70 AD than the Holocaust. By some numbers, that's true. By Josephus's numbers, I think that's true. Some people doubt Josephus's numbers. Some of those people are just skeptics, so it's hard to decide. Yeah, prophecies, you cannot prove that. That's a possible inference that is not a provable one. Yep, very good, Stephen. Very good. Mike says, Old Covenant Israel will never face a great tribulation again because the Old Covenant has been fulfilled. Yep, that's true as well. Randy says, I like the way you're pondering. Kathy says, yes, the argument makes sense. Mike says, I think we have problems with the word saved. Yeah, we again, and I don't know if this is what you mean, but I would agree. Because of systematic theology, we assign an abstract definition to words, and then we see that everywhere the word is used. And that's just not how language works, and it's certainly not consistent that way throughout the New Testament or the Old Testament or anybody's writings. It doesn't work. Saved here, it makes much more sense that saved here is saved from the army that's coming. That's what he says. Run. You can be saved from the slaughter of the Roman armies if you run. Right? Doesn't that make much more sense? I mean, let's think of it this way. When you see the abomination of desolation, when you see the army camping around Jerusalem, then let those in Judea flee to the mountains, those in the housetop not come down. He in the field, do not go back in to get your garments. Woe to those with child. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or in Sabbath, because there will be great tribulation such as has never been before and ever will be. And if those days had not been shortened, no flesh would have gone to heaven. That makes absolutely zero sense, does it? If those days had not been cut short, nobody would have had eternal life. No. He's not suddenly talking about eternal life here. All right, online Shelby. Matt, you're going to be so happy. I'm persuading myself even stronger to your view of that earlier statement. That makes so much more sense in this context, I think. But we do. Just like the dispensationalists and our friend here, Prophecy Guy and Rico Guy, we just don't read the text in its context. We read so many other books. You know, if you read all the dispensationalists and watch Left Behind and all that, then it doesn't matter what the context actually is or the words that are chosen. You're going to interpret it according to your presuppositions. And on the other side, systematic theologians do the same thing. And this actually just isn't that hard to understand. It's laid out pretty straightforward. Is that what you're getting at, Mike? Or did I take your statement and run a different direction than you intended with it? All right, it's 10 o'clock, so I was going to go into some more. So if you want to read ahead, remind yourself of Daniel 7 and the vision Daniel has there of the coming of the Son of Man, because that's what he's going to say here. And I'll just draw your attention here. We'll come back and see this tomorrow, but notice he uses a comparison. As lightning comes, so will be the parousia of the Son of Man, which is not the same thing as saying there's going to be a visible person. Oh, that is out of focus. Has it been out of focus the whole time? Anyway, I digress. That is not the same thing as saying they're going to see him like lightning. And I know he does say in a moment, every eye will see him, but as someone else alluded to the other day, that I'm going to show you what that means as well. All right, we will leave it there. Appreciate your comments and your encouragements, and just that it's getting across the way I wanted to. That's good. Whether I persuade you or not, whether you agree or not, I appreciate the fact that you're getting it. So thank you. We'll see you tomorrow. Grace and peace to you.